Welcome to the Courage Never Quits podcast, where members of the West Point class of 1986 tell their stories. I'm your host, Paul LaFontaine. As always, the views expressed in this podcast are those of the participants and not of West Point, the Army, or any organization. Let's go to the podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, today on the Courage Never Quits podcast, we have a rogues gallery, and we are gathering Jim Nicholas, Jay Millen, Dave Baum, and Mark Wolf, all former members of the Opfor at the National Training Center. Gentlemen, welcome to the podcast.
Hey. So great to be here.
Good to be here, Paul. Last time I saw you at the NTC, I was handing you an MRE and crying over you.
All right, well, that's how it's going to go today. I see. We started off. That's good. Okay. That's good. I feel like I should actually have given you four, balaclavas and had you sit there and say unnamed commander of the Opfor. So I got to say, this was inspired by Pat Antonetti said, I want to hear more from the Opfor guys. Everyone in our class went through some version of the National Training Center, be it JRTC, over in Grafenwehr, and of course out at our beloved Fort Irwin. You all four were at Fort Irwin. Let's go around the horn. We'll start with Jim and just give us a real high level of why you chose the National Training Center, which was a pretty new concept when we graduated. Jim, why did you choose it as a location?
Well, when we talked in the podcast, if you recall, I had a mentor. I got a mentor at school who was a retired four-star who happened to be instrumental in establishing the National Training Center. And when I met him on a fluke, he just took me aside and said, Jim, the Army is learning at the National Training Center, and that's why I went. I mean, I had,
mentor just said, go there, young man.
Exactly. Armor guys at school, all the colonels were saying, why aren't you going to Hood or going to Germany?
Yeah.
But I listened to him, General Clark, and, best decision I made.
Awesome. Jay, how did you choose the National Training Center?
Yeah, so Jim was my roommate, and he said, I'll buy the beer, and I said, I'm in. So, no, actually, similar story. I got sent by Colonel Brower down to meet a retired four-star guy by the name of Albert Wedemeyer, who had been the U.S. Army plans officer for mobilization for World War II and the exchange officer of the Kriegsacademy, the German Kriegsacademy, right before World War II. And he told me, hey, if you want to learn how to fight and learn how to really understand maneuver warfare, the only place you're going to be able to do that in the near future is at the NTC. So that's why I went. Same reason as Jim. And because Dave Baum was going with me.
Well, absolutely.
We only had two infantry slots, and it was Dave and me.
Dave, your company mate, Dave Baum, why did you choose the National Training Center?
Yeah, I mentioned on the podcast also that a little bit low in the class, so options were a little limited. And I think it was an Armor magazine that had an article about this place that very few people knew about. Is the way I remember it, guys. I don't think too many people in the Army knew about it. And that article had some guys out there sporting berets, and I thought that looks pretty cool, something different. And just how do you explain some of the decisions we make? But it just seemed interesting and different. They're wearing berets. I'm in.
Dave, always a fashion plate, following the fashion. I love that about you. That's fantastic. And Mark, what was your path to the National Training Center?
I'm probably similar to Jay. Jimmy was my beast roommate, so he was a heavy influencer. I studied Russian, and I was also like Dave in the middle of the class. So all the really good places were gone. I could have made it to Germany, but it would have been like the 8th ID. And it just seemed like a neat thing, kind of do the Russian stuff for a couple of years. And it did prove to be probably one of the best jobs I had.
Right. So what we'll do is we'll highlight the fashion and the fact that we're all following Jim Nicholas's footsteps.
Yeah, the black beret, and
being a little bit lower in the class, limited options.
Yeah, we got to wear.
Which tells you something about me, because I got to choose that I wanted to go, and I went with the limited option.
That's
I passed up the ACR.
Yeah, let's go around. Then we're going to do it. We'll start with Dave, and I'll just always kind of rotate around. Dave, talk about your favorite mission. Like, what was one that stands out when you think back and say, "Man, that was a heck of a mission."
Oh man, this is why I didn't want to do this, because I don't have that fresh thing. I mean, I would say that there was times going in the Northern Corridor where we'd be dropping off division recon assets, driving up some of those mountains, and I look back and I think to myself, what in that, what was I thinking? I mean, just the danger. No lie, it wasn't courage because it wasn't informed, But we were taking those Humvees up the side of the, to the top of these, not mountain, it's not snow capped. Anybody's been out to NTC knows it's not 14,000 feet, but still the drop offs to the right and to the left of the vehicles. That we would take those vehicles, and it was for the pursuit of excellence. We wanted to get that recon exactly where we thought would be the exact best. So, like on one hand, I'm like proud of the effort, but looking back, I'm like, what were we thinking? That was so insanely dangerous. So I don't have, so that would be some of the memories that are most pointing danger.
Jay, I have to imagine your favorite memories have to do with some sort of large tent where you laid out a huge feast or something. I don't know, some kind of thing. What was some of your favorite missions?
Yeah, so I'd say probably for me there were two very different parts of it. One was when we had the National Guard augmentees come in, and those guys were varied. They could be either really squared away or just a complete disaster. And one that stood out to me is I had an engineer company from New Jersey that was doing fighting positions. The engineer company was a construction company from New Jersey. They were all dozer operators, D4 operators, backhoe operators. The guy that was the company commander was the son of the owners. And all these guys that were, in his shop were in his company. And they built these Y fighting positions, two-tiered fighting positions for BMPs in like 10 minutes, where normally it'd take like hours for these things. And he's like, what do you want to do next? And I'm like, well, how about sandbags? Sure, how many do you need? So I had him like fill 2,000 sandbags and pre-position them for the next few rotations. And those guys were pretty squared away. I think the other one, Paul, would be we had the Puerto Rican National Guard's infantry augmentees. And I don't know if you guys remember that rotation, but the company I had, I think they were like two guys that spoke any English, like literally. But they were all super squared away, super fit, right? Fighting guys. And they just crawl up those mountains like there was no tomorrow. And it was pretty crazy watching those guys.
That's amazing. Jim, how about you?
Yeah, there was a lot of fun out there, but the one mission I do remember against the 3rd ACR, and the 3rd ACR always came out. They were always pretty good. This was as a scout, and for some reason this mission, it was going to be a regimental attack, but we had like 2 or 3 days where the 3rd ACR could dig in. So, like Dave was saying, I went up on one of these mountains. I'm on the south side of the central corridor, due south of like 760 or 780. And I'm sitting up there all night, but then I drop down and go find where the 3rd ACR was. And they used to have these huge panels on the back of their tanks to identify the platoon, the troop, what vehicle number. I mean, I had these guys down to rights. Because it was 3 days, I'd go down, at night, I'd go back up. I mean, it was a great scouting mission. And I don't remember, Dave, if it was when we were still working together or not. I'm sure it was. But that was a blast.
Yeah, I do remember that mission because I had gotten all that information and sent in it a little bit earlier than you.
That's probably true.
And Paul, that does remind me, speaking of Baum not remembering any missions, I think the one I remember about him the most is the 75th Ranger Regiment mission, where they did a mass tack jump into the NTC, and Dave, cleaned their clock. And we both got in arguments with battalion commanders. Unfortunately, the one I got in an argument with, I had 8 guys. He thought I had like 800. And at the AAR, he's like, well, there were like 3 infantry companies out there. I'm like, no, sir, it was just 3 of us in Humvees. That's it. And then I reported to him as my next battalion commander. That didn't go too well.
Well, sometimes there's a downside to the end of the Opfor. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's funny talking to you guys. It's dislodging some memories and stuff. And that was the mission I was going to go to if I could have gone over again, because as well as the dismounted infantry was able to do, there was that confrontation with the leadership of the augmentees. And I remember as a young lieutenant just going off on the augmented infantry commander. I don't know, Jay, if you were standing nearby there in the middle.
I was, yeah.
Just a leadership experience. So here I am. We'd walked all night long, doing everything we could. We're fighting against the Rangers. We know we want to do the best we can. We want to give them a good mission, a good enemy to fight against. They're an important asset to the country and everything else. And I'm making this longer than it needs to be, but I lost my cool. I mean, I went off on this augmented infantry company commander. I'm like, just profanity, the whole thing about how wrong he was and how he needed to do what I thought he needed to do. Well, my battalion.
But he didn't accomplish something in your
He was
plan?
doing something wrong. I don't remember the details. He wasn't gonna do with what I was advising him to do or something. I can't remember what it was, but it was important. And I remember the point I bring it up is my Jay, our battalion commander. We would have walked, like, what's the phrase, like walk across a mile of glass or whatever. Like, our battalion commander there, Colonel McFarland, we had such respect for him. Vietnam veteran and just an awesome man. And he was standing right behind me. As I'm going, I didn't know it. It's the middle of the night. I remember him saying to me, "Yeah, no, right." And so after my like whatever tirade or whatever it was, profanity going off on us as a lieutenant to this captain or whatever rank he was, he said, "David," I just one word in the middle of the night. He spoke one word, my battalion commander, and it was like as though everything just calmed me down. And it wasn't fear so much because I had such regard for him. It was just like David, and it centered me. I was able to apologize to the guy in the middle of the night. We were able to kind of move on. But it was just such an interesting, powerful, like, leadership experience of when you have so much regard, for the leader. And then just like one word, I knew I had done wrong. I knew I was out of place. I knew I was talking to the wrong guy in the wrong way in front of his we in the middle of the night. We were all tired. It was such a powerful, I'll never forget that, the power of leadership in that moment. Getting me straightened out and fixing the situation. So I know I'm going on and on, but that was no,
that's a great example that we all had a chance to experience. And you guys had more field time than most of us, and so you had a chance to experience that for sure. Mark, what was your favorite mission?
Oh heck, I mean, I always had a lot of fun ones. The regimental attacks. I mean, I can't even remember a specific one. I remember, doing those. Those were always fun when you were a tank platoon leader, just, or running across the desert and, just trying to see where you could get through, finding your way past the stuff because the scouts have usually figured out where all the obstacles were. And right. I do remember one where Pete Monzo was the battalion commander. He was in charge for that rotation, and we were slamming into somebody. We were going south, and we were going north. And he went, okay. And I think it was the second AD. I seem to remember they did a really good obstacle line that we hadn't caught, and they were killing the lead battalion was dying in the kill sack.
Yeah.
And he made the call, shift south. And everybody just turned and punched through because they had started moving north to reinforce success and had left the other avenue of approach open. And we just, we lost about two MRBs out of it. Right, we had a full battalion just run through to their trains. And I mean, they did good, but they had shifted and left an opening that those guys were so between
shift south.
The battalion commanders we had were top notch. They weren't necessarily guys who the Army always thought was the best, but they really were good.
Cool. So in order to get class participation, I reached out to some folks who've been through the National Training Center from the other side, and have some questions have been sent out by the crowd. So I'll get you guys' thoughts. The first one's from Jim Morris from Dallas, Texas. And Jim asks, you may know him as Cheese Dog, is the whale the most defended terrain feature in North America?
The most poorly defended terrain. Just a little clarification.
Where did most of the missions go? I mean, we knew the whale, the Colorado, did you guys have the pattern down of where everything was happening? You had to have, right?
Yeah, I would say there's one part that nobody ever got, and I got in a lot of trouble for this. Dave, you probably remember this, but there was actually a big bridge that went into Fort Irwin over a deep, dry river. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of off limits, but I took a bunch of tows down there one night and just stayed under the bridge where we had thermal imaging, and I just pop up and shoot the next guy, then pop up and shoot the next guy, then pop up and shoot the next guy. And they're like, where the fuck is this coming from? Excuse my language, Pilaf. But finally the OCs were like, wait a minute, I don't think you're supposed to be here. I'm like, well, what do you mean I'm not supposed to be here? So I think that was going into that Bike Lake area. You kind of mobilize, and it was they would come through a pass, and there was just a channeling, and just take them out one by one.
Yeah, I mean, you fought so many different places, and they always moved it around. When live fire was going on, there were certain areas up by Red Lake or up by Bicycle Lake you couldn't use because they were in the impact zone. I remember, like Jay, violating the ROA, mostly because I didn't realize I was, as I hopped on the hardball coming in from Eastgate during a movement to contact. I said, I'm going to see how fast we can get this Sheridan up to. And I was hauling ass, and an OC waves me down and says, don't you know you're not allowed to drive on the hardball? No. Who made that rule up?
Boy, now stupid. I can be told all these years later.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
if I could just jump in there. So, interesting, though, I don't know what the collective memory is, but I did not see or witness, or I was not aware of, like, widespread ROE, though. I felt like for the Opfor, for the most part, like, we didn't need to do that. I mean, when you know the terrain as well as we did, I mean, after being there for a couple of years, I mean, it was almost like I don't know, it was like a really special experience having so much familiarity with a plot of ground, to know, in depending on what direction, what your interest was, to know specific places to hide a vehicle, or specific places to have a vantage point, or to use a certain weapon system. I mean, to know the ground so well. It was much fun, and it didn't require too much shenanigans, because it's such an advantage knowing the ground so well.
Yeah, I agree with that, Dave. That's a fair point.
Yeah, I mean, the land was the land. You couldn't change the central corridor. You couldn't change the southern corridor. I mean, there's only so many options. What was interesting, though, because we got there so early in the career of the NTC, we fought units like the 24th that you were in that were, full up with M1s and Bradleys. Mm-hmm. We fought units with 113s and PCs. We fought the 9th with the whole tow, thing that was all Humvees. We did heavy light rotations. Yep. We saw the introduction of the OH-58 Delta and the M1A1 and the Apache. I mean, for us, it was the lethality of the unit coming that was really the challenge after a while, because the ground was the ground. There's so many places they could go, but okay, what was this unit going to try to do differently with the equipment that they had that we might not have seen before?
Yeah, Jim, you missed this one. My first rotation there was the last M60A1 rotation with the 5th ID back in January of '87. And I do remember Tom Weiss, when he was talking about their rotation, they were M1A1s. They didn't have ITVs the first rotation. I remember that they came out with the A1s. They had toe caps.
Right.
They didn't have ITVs. They had the pedestal-mounted toes.
Which is a great segue into the next question. This is from Pat Antonetti, writes from Washington, D.C. Was there a terrain feature that once the Blue Force seized it that you just said, uh-oh, we're in trouble? Was there any place where you saw them deploy and you said, well, this is going to be a tough nut to crack?
I'd say Porta Potty Wadi, because it was just, you just couldn't see anything. The terrain was so uneven.
Well,
it was less about it. You just couldn't see people.
Yeah, the washes in the central corridor, there were a couple of them that if your route of advance was going through them, they got real restrictive, and they were really easy to set up firing positions to cover. You'd have to come over a ridge in order to get to where you could start engaging, and that was usually the start of their engagement area.
Yeah. Hey, Paul, can I make a comment about, or really to ask a question of my brothers here, if they shared the same perspective? When the comment was made about seeing so many different, I think Jim just mentioned about seeing sort of the evolution of some of the technology, some of the the different weapon systems kind of that were rolled out during our time out there. The perception, the memory I have is that like you wouldn't be able to predict what would be a difficult rotation though, because the difficulty of the rotation for the Opfor was always based upon like how well trained, the discipline, the leadership of the unit. So it could be some antiquated set of equipment that the unit was bringing, but they stayed awake at night. They took security seriously. They had discipline, and they checked their weapon systems and had proper range cards or whatever the stuff was called. They knew how far out they could touch. I mean, it was fun to see some of these units that didn't get the fancy equipment, but they were disciplined and did really well. And again, leadership. I've taken that forward in life. That it's good to take advantage of all the different assets and whatever else, but oftentimes it comes down to the person and training and leadership and discipline. It's like drill.
One of the last 4th ID rotations, they were doing a defense Brown Dednam towards Crash Hill, and we were coming from east to west. I mean, it was 113s and M68-3s, and they were bore-sighted. They were disciplined. I mean, they gave us a pretty good whack.
And that 3rd ACR rotation I was talking about with the toe caps and the A1s, one of those squadrons knew how to bore sight and was kicking our butts left and right. The other squadron was worthless practice. I mean, they weren't bad. They weren't that bad, but they were not nearly as good. They were about an average unit. But the one squadron had they fought us tooth and nail to a standstill.
Did anyone surprise you? Any unit kind of catch you and say, "Wow, these guys are sorted out"?
Yeah, I'd have to say that surprised me was the 7th ID, and their ability as light fighters to maneuver in that terrain with very limited movement capability. I mean, they were not used to having, vehicles. They weren't used to, flying around, any of that stuff. And they did a pretty good job. I mean, a couple of rotations that I saw come through. Your guys weren't half bad, T-Law, 24th ID. Yeah. The intel capability was a little poor, but, the fighters were pretty good.
Yeah, I remember an airborne unit one time going into our assembly areas, parking the tanks, going in and coming back out after a night of rest. And there was a platoon or a squad or something that was had been left behind up on the hill above us. So they came walking down, and we gave them food, we gave them water, we took care of them, but that was the difficulty of the light units, is sometimes they'd get separated. Talking about the 7th ID, I remember one rotation where they were with the guard, where the maneuver force was the guard, and the battalion that was planning didn't do a great job. Some of those crews had been together for years, just like the engineers, the guard engineers, reserve engineers. Those guys worked together, and they knew what they were doing as a crew. They could, and they were. Some of them got to be pretty tenacious and tough to dig out.
What was this about you guys out cooking meals and having barbecues and all that? That might have snuck into the text exchange. We're out there eating MREs and weeping, as you mentioned earlier, Jay. Who's out there cooking barbecues? Come clean with us now.
My first sergeant brought out a cut in half 55-gallon drum that he turned into a barbecue, and once a rotation, we'd get steaks and everything else, and that was dinner. Half the time the crews would have just the grill, the grate, and they dig a hole in the ground, pour briquettes in it, and in their cooler they'd have some chicken or steak or something and light it up, and but we were only out there. I had a really hard time once or twice. I think I stayed out 8 nights once.
Yeah.
Most of the time it was 2 or 3 nights.
It shows you the power of a hot meal, and was there was a difference between the infantry and the armor?
Absolutely. We were absolutely much more miserable, Paul, for sure. But we had a little bit different take on the barbecue. At the end of each rotation, Dave and I were part of a group. We drug in Jimmy and Mark too as well, called the Ready Rifle Supper Club. And everyone would pool money together, and we'd have a blowout meal after the end of the rotation, all the lieutenants. And I remember we did this one time, and you may remember this. Dave, but we decided we were going to roast a pig. Well, I had to actually go down and get the pig, and the pig was still alive when I went to get it. So didn't count on that. So I do that.
Live pig.
Yeah, I take care of that part of the mission. Bring it back, and one of our fellow lieutenants, guy named Kent Marburger, is like, "Oh no, I got it." So he's gonna roast the pig. So we go back out on rotation, come back in. The thing's like a charcoal briquette. I don't know what he did, but it was just god awful. So we
everything you went through.
Yeah. So no more pigs for Kent Marburger, and we stuck with ribs and steaks and lobsters after that.
There you go. Much easier path.
Yeah.
Because there wasn't much of an O Club at Irwin. It was pretty bleak.
At the end there was. At the beginning there wasn't.
I actually stayed with Dave on one of the trips I went out there to do research. I actually hung out with Dave. He had all those books you see in the background were actually jammed into this BOQ room. We literally had the same number of books back then. And the only thing we did, we went down to Barstow, I think. We went down because you said, we got to get out of here to find a place to eat. So we actually had to go off post and even have a meal.
I mean, the thing about, for those of us that were living, and we all were, all four of us were living in the BOQs, we weren't married. So there were like 6 or 7 BOQs total that were all together. And they were only 2 stories, a dozen floors per floor, or dozen rooms per floor. So, everybody was literally within, a 5-minute walk to everybody else's room. So when you got together, it was everybody was there, and we were a 5-minute walk to the O Club too. So you could get drunk at the O Club and stumble across to your room and not get lost.
Yeah, and I will say, Paul, I don't know if you realized this during your research, but someone had a very bad sense of humor. All the streets at Fort Irwin were named after great American military disasters. So, we had a Little Bighorn Court, Anzio Drive. It was just like awful. And I think the O Club was at like 19. How was the Civil War battle was off in Antietam, 19 Antietam Drive or something. It was just, all these, bloodbaths.
Some engineer was assigned there and was really upset. He said, I'm going to. Because you can imagine, they drove out there and there was nothing there. They said, make a base here, right? He's like, all right, I'm going to name it after every disaster.
It was an interesting place, that's for sure. And it was, years later, I started, when I was in the reserve, Army Reserve, I started going around to some of the different bases, and you start seeing, the Army, when they built bases in World War II, which is when that place really went up, they used a standard standard map and just plopped it on the ground, and they put in, they put in certain number of barracks, certain number of mess halls, certain number of barracks, a mess hall, headquarters buildings. There was a structure to them, and you can go to Fort Indian Town Gap. You can go down to dozens of different posts that exist that still have the World War II stuff, and you can look at a map and see the outline of that. And
Mark, I'm convinced it was one guy that did all that. It was just the same guy.
It probably was. He drew it.
He's still in uniform.
Irwin was one of the places that, because it existed, but it wasn't a base like that. It wasn't one of the training bases. Yeah. So it didn't have that format. But Camp Roberts had it. And there, everywhere else I went, it's like you'd look at the map and it's like, this is the same place. It's just moved.
But not every one of those places had a terrain feature called Oh Shit Hill.
Yeah. There's that.
Where was Oh Shit Hill?
The Peanut.
Oh Shit Hill is when you're coming from Barstow and you hit the crest.
Yeah.
As you're coming down, you see Irwin for the first time, and you go, "Oh shit!"
Yeah, it's a 10-mile drive or 12-mile drive as you first see it. Yeah. I had my car up to 120 on that road once.
Well, there you go. The actual true story from the 24th Infantry Division. Jay, demonstrating the near perfect execution of the Opfor, you conducted a spoiling attack, because one of my actual questions was, 2nd Battalion, 7th Infantry, 24th ID, the S2's performance there still held as a standard and taught in board colleges everywhere. You did the perfect spoiling attack, and it got me anyway. But we actually had one of our vehicles lost at NTC, and Everybody was concerned about it, and a radio call came in, and this is not made up. And they said, well, what is your location? And this poor young sergeant said, I don't know, sir, but I think I'm under the moon.
That's pretty typical.
He's Dog Morris. That you contributed to that one as well. So anyway, best and the brightest in the 24th. We're proud of our NCOs.
Now, Paul, when you told me that story earlier, it was a little bit more dramatic. It was, hold on just a minute, sir. I'm moving under the moon now.
We'll be right there with the recovery vehicle.
Yeah.
You had asked in the text about the terrain features, and one of them was the Colorado. And this goes to that story, which is, what do you remember about the Colorado? I remember driving by an M1 that had gone down slope first, had driven the main gun into the bottom of the Colorado. I remember finding an M1 flipped on its top. I remember seeing a Bradley sort of sitting halfway, down the side of the edge of the wash. I mean, that Colorado was a dangerous place. At nighttime for Blue Force guys.
I remember.
Yeah, hey, and even Pete Rampelmeyer, our guy, flipped the DMP. I mean, he managed to flip a Sheridan.
Yeah. I remember.
Right. Yeah, but that's so light, he could flip it back himself.
Yeah. I remember being in the defense over the washboard there, and seeing an OH-58 go down because it had gone down into the Colorado to try to avoid fire, and clipped a rotor blade and tore it. And they were fine, but it was interesting to see that dust cloud all of a sudden.
So for the kids at home, the Colorado was just very steep. I remember, Dave, I actually rode along with you one time, and one of the more terrifying moments of my early Army career was being in the back of that vehicle while you were going at these amazing slopes, speaking of dangerous things you guys were doing all the time. But you were just up there with your binoculars and doing your thing, and I was in the back, crouched behind you.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting to talk about it now because there's a certain humor to it, like how crazy we were or whatever, but there was, even in the moment, though, I mean, the way I remember it, guys, I mean, there was a serious danger element. Like, we knew what we're doing was not that we're heroes or anything. Obviously, nobody's firing at us. Obviously, in our military careers and since whatever military career we've had, there's been incredible heroism in combat, but there was a certain element that it colors all my memories of just flying across the desert with a certain danger present.
Yeah. I
Go
remember
ahead,
doing
Mark.
attacks. I remember doing attacks, Dave, in that line, where you'd be the guy, you had an open ground in front of you, somebody had to go. And it was like, okay, somebody's got to go. I guess it might be my day. And, that's kind of one of those where I honestly have always told folks after that, a lot of that stuff was just chance. You'd either get across or somebody just happened to be looking your way at the time you decided to go and pulled the trigger.
But, Mark, that's a great point. And, we talk about each other and our brothers, but there's a kid I'll always remember, PFC Kevin Hosier, who was my driver. And he was just dog-ass tired one night, Mark, to that point, and we had to go across just a way open space. I'm like, Hosier, I'll drive, get up in the top and TC. So he gets in the to your point of your fear of death ride with Baum, Paul, he gets in the top. I floor the damn thing, and about 5 minutes in, I hear this bam, 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 bam on top of the Humvee. I'm like, what does it say, sir? Stop, stop, stop. I'm like, okay. He says, sir, I know why they made you an officer. The Army does not want you driving any of their vehicles. Please get back. Please get back to the cupola. So I had been banging him around for 10 minutes, I guess, pretty badly.
Driving too much. You still drive like that.
Well, you talk about the danger. You talk about, officers driving. That was one of those things that, I was very cognizant of when I left the NTC and trying to explain to my junior officers and NCOs about really understanding your vehicle. Where is the center of gravity? Can you go up that hill? How fast can you go? I mean, that's one of those intangible things you learn at the NTC, that just because of the amount of time you spent out there, on odd levels of terrain, going over bumps, going through ditches, and in tank ditches. I mean, you really get a sense for having, I don't know, like a sixth sense with the center of gravity of your vehicle and what you can and cannot do.
I had my Sheridan pulled up. The ridge line across from the whale was going across it and through both tracks. As I was down the hill, I had an 88 at the top. Guys literally had to pull the cable all the way out so they could hook up to the front of the Sheridan and drag the tank up to the top of the hill. Because we weren't, otherwise it was staying there. There was no way to get it out otherwise.
Be like another version of Crash Hill. There'd be a
Well, Paul, let's flip it on its head for a minute. What was your most fun experience at the NTC on the other side of the fence with us?
Oh my gosh, I think we were going out there was terrifying, and I certainly cannot represent the experiences of all classmates who went through the program, but it was essentially, prior to later actual wars, it was the only way that a battalion commander was evaluated.
Yeah.
And so being on, and the reason I know that is that I was on battalion staff as an S2, and the battalion commander and the brigade commander were very clear on that's where you got your OER grade, was how your battalion performed at NTC. And everything we did was preparing for the rotations to NTC at the 24th. So all anywhere from a platoon, company, and battalion operation exercises back at home was about doing well at the NTC. So we were super intense about that. And so we would come out there to study what the whole thing was. It was like studying for a test, essentially. So we would just prepare tremendously for that. So really coming out there and hanging out with you guys was one of the great memories I had. Jay, you were just finishing your time there, and that was actually the first time we'd met, because we didn't know each other at school. Sadly, I didn't see Jim or Mark. I knew at school, but I didn't get run into you guys. Then I was able to hang out with company mate and dear friend Dave while he was there, and Buddy Carmen, who was the armor scout platoon leader at the time. I got to be good friends with those guys. But we had a little cabal of intel officers, Lee Wimbish, Jim Morris, and others, and we would all share what we learned. So we would all come back together and share all the maps and the missions we saw and all that. It was an authorized study group, and so the first bit of information I had was a map that I had gotten from you, Jay. so they were like, "Oh, wow, that's cool." It's, so
you ratted me out.
These intel officers, in the end. It was really how you guys operated that was the key information, not the specific plans. But so we would do that, but we'd always keep track of how each other did. And so we had a small intel cabal that we think did a pretty good job. But there was one of our members who was excitable, and I have not named him, so it wasn't Lee or Cheese Dog or myself. And so there was an attack that was similar to the one you described, Mark, where there was a shift south. And there was just this mournful wail that came up with the radio saying, "They're in the Colorado! They're in the Colorado!" And so we just, every time we would see that particular officer in the future, we would just start wailing that whatever it was. And sadly, that was, we were teasing him a little bit, and I would say it was a little bit mean-spirited. So the fact that we got so much lore out of the NTC was one of the favorite things.
Yeah.
So. Everybody has an NTC story.
I only ended up going back twice after I left NTC. I did 37 with the Opfor. Then I went to post staff and was handling visitors for another dozen rotations. Then I went back in the Brigade S4 shop I was the movement guy. I moved everybody out and then moved everybody back.
Yeah.
Sitting in the A-lock at the brigade in the BSA for the whole rotation, basically, and went back out as a BMO, which was always fun. Recovering everybody else's equipment. It was much harder being a Blue 4 guy.
It's a bit harder. So Jim, you mentioned learning the center of mass of a vehicle and really getting that sixth sense. What other lessons did you all take out of NTC's experience specifically that you used either in the Army or in civilian life? What were
in the Army, the other thing was understanding movement and time distance with larger formations. I mean, you really had to keep track of. Even as tank platoon leaders, brand new second lieutenants, you got 100 vehicles in your company, or maybe 80, whatever, and you're going at the middle of the night. You're LDing at 3 o'clock in the morning to hit an actual LD of 4, because you got this long traverse you got to go through in the central corridor, and you got to make sure your timing is right, because the plan was for you to LD first, and then the next battalion was going to LD 15 minutes behind you. I mean, all of that stuff was skills that perhaps if you only did it once, you really couldn't glean some tricks of the trade how to do that. So I would say that's one of the big ones. Just understanding movement and how long it took for big formations to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Dave, what do you think?
As far as lessons?
Yeah, just any lessons you took.
Yeah.
Where you...
One of the big one that I think I carried forward is just that leadership task of having everybody understand the mission, so that if one vehicle from that element is still alive, it understands where to go, what to do, and I think that was the great strength of what I saw in Opfor before going to battalion level tasks as scout platoon leader and so forth, was like the idea that each of my vehicle commanders knew where to go, could get on the radio, could function as a MRB commander or MRC commander or whatever. And when you got that kind of clarity of mission among everybody, natural things can happen, because you got a sergeant or whoever, a specialist or whatever, like doing crazy things way above their pay grade because everybody else is dead or whatever. And the overall, the bigger unit's successful.
Mark, what did you take away that?
Well, kind of in the line of kind of what Jim I think is saying, or some of that is, the attack I used the example of early, where we shifted. That highlighted something that it was a combination of the guys who were the ops planners, and I was doing that for a couple of years too, needed to understand that if you executed a contingency, you needed to plan on what were you leaving open. You needed to look at that type of stuff. You needed to not just, you needed to, the planners needed to think through what the consequences of making some of those choices were, because they may have a consequence. And I ended up, in the difficulty too of moving things. My last, like I said, the last job I had at NTC was handling the visitors. And I remember sitting up on top of one of the hills in the central corridor, watching a task force doing a movement to contact with the Opfor, with a German chief of their armor center branch, major general standing next to me. And it was, I think, 12 kilometers from the lead team to the middle two teams, and then another 12 kilometers to the trail team. They couldn't support one another. They were completely out of. They had just messed up the mission. And the German looks at me and goes, "Why are you letting them continue? Why hasn't somebody stopped it?" And I looked at him and I said, "They won't learn if they don't feel the pain."
Yeah,
that's the way we learn. And that was the only mission that I can recall, because General Graves, the Corps commander, it was a 3rd Corps unit, was there that mission. It was the only one I remember. He told Ops Group, pull them back, put them back in their assembly areas. They're doing it again tomorrow.
Yeah, feel the pain. Right?
And in 3.5 years, that was the only mission I ever remembered that happening on.
Yeah. Jay, how about you? What enduring lessons did you take from?
Yeah, well, so Dave mentioned earlier Doug McFarland, our battalion commander, who with a quiet word could really change demeanor. And when I got there, our S3 was a guy named Carter Ham, wound up becoming a 4-star, an AFRICOM commander. Great guy, had some challenges earlier in his career personally, life-wise. And he handed me the penal platoon. All the guys in the platoon I got when I came to Fort Irwin were track 3 drug and alcohol failures, including my platoon sergeant, named Ronald Henderson, who was a 3-time Vietnam tour veteran.
Yeah.
So, I kind of took a measure of, what am I getting into here? But I learned that if you meet people where they are, they'll surprise you. And some of those guys didn't make it. I mean, they just didn't make it. But a lot of them did. And to Dave's earlier point about specialists and sergeants open performing, what I learned is unique to our culture here, and Paul, you and I lived in Europe a long time, the initiative, the sense of purpose, the willingness to do whatever it takes to get it done, that is uniquely American. And I think the one thing we didn't do the Army favors on as the Opfor is we didn't really act like Russians. I mean, if we didn't act like Russians, the units would just kind of sat on the ground, and as soon as the battalion commander done, they would have gone in circles, wondering what to do next. They had one-way radios. But I learned that most people want to do the right thing and want to be led the right way, and they just want to be heard and listened to. I think it's I think is the most instructive part of the MTC experience. I think to Mark's point earlier about feeling the pain, units learned how to function. That's what they actually learned how to do with the MTC. They learned how to work together.
To put a term to what Jane said, though, is we executed mission command. In both battalions, it was very much mission command to make sure every soldier knows what his boss and his boss's boss is supposed to do, and then, hit the gas and go for the objective. I mean, and it was really a tribute to the courage of the senior leaders that let us lieutenants and sergeants go do what we had to do. But it came at a cost. I mean, we spent a lot of time doing rock drills and rehearsals, and we used to go out when we were going to an assembly area, we'd have to go in a column and change formations and practice. We do breaching drills before we go for an attack. So you'd spend Saturday afternoon doing breaching drills, sleep that night, and then get up in the morning and do your regimental attack.
And the soldiers, the soldiers we had were no different, I'm sure, than any other unit. But I mean, you had, like Jay said, the guys who were the rejects. You had guys there was a guy who was my company clerk, training guy, who had had a full ride scholarship, I think, at Stanford, but wasn't studying right. So he went into the Army. My driver had been a lieutenant in the National Guard and had joined the Army because he was just working a week, earning enough to get by for the month, and then not do anything else for the rest of the month, and kind of realized he needed to get his life together, so he went on active duty. And one time, it came to a head one time when his cousin, who was driving one of his 2 tractor trailers he owned, abandoned it in Portland, Oregon, with a trailer full of refrigerated trailer full of bananas, and he had to get up there 3 days before Christmas leave started, and the battalion commander didn't want to let him go. Otherwise, the truck was going to be impounded, and he had, and it's like, the soldiers in the U.S. Army are just phenomenal. But even the problem children are. Yeah, right. But the variety of people you run into, they're there because they want to be there.
You guys make such an excellent point that was not a Soviet formation. That was an American spirited formation using approximate Soviet style columns and all that. But there was mission command injected in such a way that it was a unique hybrid organization.
The other thing I did in the 2 Blue 4 rotations I was on, I would sit there, look at the op order. I'd look at the plan, and I'd write down on a 3x5 card what the Opfor was going to do and stick it in my pocket.
Well, yeah, because you might have seen it a few times.
I knew what they were going to do based on what we decided what our plan looked like, because I knew where I could see the holes. And that gets back to I always wondered why the hell the G3 guys or S3 guys that were planning it couldn't see, or why the S2 couldn't go, well, if you do that, they're going to go this way.
Stu. How come you couldn't do that?
Well,
you had my map. Come on, man.
Maybe during my AR, the OC just looked and said, "All right, S2, you did a pretty decent job
There you
because
go.
it was exact." Anyway.
Well, there's an easy way Mark was able to do that was because, I don't know, in the Armor Battalion, I think it was a saying, if you build it, they will come.
Yeah.
If you put an obstacle out there, the Blue Force are going to go to the obstacle.
Yeah.
Even if they can go around it to the left or to the right, they're going to go to because it's there for a reason, and they're going to help you out.
Well, it certainly is eye-catching.
Like moths to the light, Paul. Like moths to the light.
It certainly is eye-catching when you put it out there. Oh boy, I tell you what, from the Blue Force perspective, some of the most serious, and I will include Desert Storm, some of the most serious butt chewings of generals to lieutenant colonels I ever saw in the short time I was in the Army was at NTC because, there you go. Anyway.
Yeah, I remember bumping into
so visible, right? You could not make any mistakes at all.
Yeah, I remember bumping into Lissa Young out there when we were out prepping a defense and a OH-58 lands in the middle of the desert near where we were setting up. And I'm like, oh, hell no, this is not happening. They're not just landing in our AOR. She had a chip light come on and had to make an emergency landing. I walk over and Lissa hops out and it's like, hey, I know you. How you doing?
I just saw Lissa at the academy. I sat together at a dinner. She's doing great. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I bumped into her a few times now. Is
there any story we haven't covered that you guys just would love to share with classmates? Because obviously this is for a closed group of classmates that watch this.
Yeah, I think, Paul, from my perspective, Jim wound up becoming an aide, I think, there at the NTC. And before, each battalion had to send somebody over to be the general officer's aide. And I can't remember Wes Clark's predecessor's name now, but the guy that was the one-star. Yeah. So I'm the sacrificial lamb to go to the interview. And he says, well, why do you want to be my aide? And I'm like, well, I don't want to be your aide, sir. I just got told I got to come. He said, well, what do you want to do? I want to go to a Ranger Battalion. Okay, I want to go to a Ranger Battalion. I will say, sometimes senior officers are actually a lot brighter than we give them credit for. And instead of getting pissed off or insulted by it, he actually, did the right thing. Sometimes you don't give kind of the ass chewing of the battalion commander by the general officer, but sometimes those guys actually get it right. And to Mark's point, the Corps Commander, General Graves, saying, hey, go do that again, because if you don't get this right, if you do this for real, you're all going to die.
Yeah, and I'd say just to that same type of high regard for some of the leaders that were there, happened to be there when we were there. The leadership climate was, we need to win. They need to have those conversations like you mentioned, Paul, where people are being corrected in an intense way because they're being evaluated and they didn't do well. We need to win so that they'll learn, so that the United States Army will learn and be ready for whatever's going on. That was the climate that I remember. Maybe I was young. Maybe I'm giving McFarland and Hammond and those guys more credit, but it was that kind of intense, this is important. Do it with excellence. You don't need to cheat. Work hard. Do it well. Yeah. This matters. Mm-hmm. They need to learn. No one knows what the future is going to hold. And look what happened. They were right. All that Desert Storm stuff happened. And I think, by the grace of God, maybe the United States Army was a little bit, better, a little bit more ready because of some of the hard lessons that were learned. Hopefully, maybe by some of our service and our best efforts to try to provide an enemy. This is the most thrilling part of my life. I loved working with you men. It was like one of the few times where I was in a culture where we want to be the very best. Every mission matters. Let's go out and do well. Let's give them some training lessons. It could save lives someday. That's how I remember it. I mean, I don't think I've embellished it too much. I don't know how you guys feel.
100%, Dave. Same way.
Yep, I agree.
And that terrain out there was beautiful. I mean, sunset in some of the, I remember sitting in one of the little passes looking over Central Corridor as the sun was setting and the golden hour, and just seeing the valleys, shade starting to come in, but the valley would just be, turn looking orange, gold orange, and it just I mean it's one of those things that to this day that's the time of day I love being out looking at
Well, I can tell you from experience that beautiful terrain out there looks a lot like southern Iraq. So Dave, you're in terms of preparing,
it's a lot.
I guarantee you.
Well, Paul, what I'll end with is what Dave said about that. I mean, kind of the challenge and kind of going back and forth that I remember, and Jimmy, you may remember this, was train Blue Force, train them, sir. I mean, that was the deal. I mean, we were focused on making everybody better, and that felt like something important. To Dave's point, really important.
Yeah, we didn't hate the Blue Four. We loved them. Because they were guys like you.
Because you were there.
Yeah, but we didn't care for them all that much when they went to Burger King.
Well,
that's true, guys. Burger King opened up. That was the only place you could eat besides the mess hall, and there was always these guys and girls just, sticking in the desert in line.
Hey, Jimmy, that's why you'd roll back in on day or two or three of the rotation and stock up then after they'd all left.
Well, look, I really appreciate the four of you coming on. We all who were in Blue 4, thank you for training us up, but also being good friends out there. And some of my favorite memories of the Army time was hanging out with you guys, specifically out there in the desert. So thanks for coming on. I know our classmates are going to love this one.
Take care, brother. Be good, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Courage Never Quits podcast, where any member of the class of 1986 who is willing to tell their story will be a guest. To get the word out and stay up to date on the latest episodes, hit the like and subscribe button. With over 900 living graduates, we have a lot of stories to tell, and you don't want to miss any of them. We'll see you in the next episode.